Coming up on 1+1, defending children with love. And on the flip side, should parents still be allowed to hit their children? Hello, I'm Jane Hutchin. Good to have you with us. Camila Batmanghelidjh knew she wanted to work with marginalised children when she was 9 years old, and just a few years later she came up with the model for her charity. Today, Kids Company has proved so successful it's caught the attention of governments around the world, including Australia's. Camila was born into a wealthy Persian family who lost everything during the Iranian Revolution. Camila's sister committed suicide. The psychotherapist works tirelessly to meet the basic needs of troubled kids, as she told Philip Williams in London.
Welcome to 1+1. Tell me, the government here spends billions of pounds every year looking after children, supposedly protecting children. You say they are abject failures. Where are they going wrong?
I think it's in the theory of mind. The government hasn't really thought about what a disturbed child looks like, behaves like, and consequently what they need. Children who've been chronically abused and neglected don't need one appointment a month with a psychiatrist. They need a consistent package of care where they're offered a reparenting opportunity. What's happening at the moment is the government now and previous governments do just assessment. They assess, they write reports, but they never do anything really meaningful.
Is that a total failure on their part? Where has the system actually gone wrong?
Let's be honest. Politicians and policymakers don't really think about abused children. And this is the problem. Children who are being abused behind closed doors can't hold politicians accountable. They can't stand up for their own needs, and repeatedly governments have ignored them.
That's a very, very depressing scenario.
Well, this is the reality. If you look at the statistics in this country, there are 1.5 million children being abused and neglected. This is a very conservative figure, but it's pretty accurate. And then about 550,000 children every year are referred to child protection systems. But there is such a shortage of resources that only about 35 to 38,000 of them are placed on the child protection register.
Is there a particular case for you of people you've dealt with? Is there one particular case that stands out for you?
There was very early in my career a girl who had become an elective mute. She wasn't speaking at all, and it was because her sister, who was a young teenager, had disclosed abuse by the stepfather, and the stepfather, in order to silence her, had wired her up to the mains and electrocuted her. And this girl just went silent with the shock of it. And this is what these children see and hear all the time. What the adults don't realize is that abused children know about each other's abuse. If you really want to find the scale of it, go and ask the children, because they all know.
So are abused children here being doubly abused by the system?
Abused children here are being absolutely degraded by the system.
How are you different? How's Kids Company different?
The Kids Company does business slightly differently, because we have understood that the abused child primarily needs to be chosen for love, they need to be respected, and they need to be offered hope. These are very important things.
Aren't these instinctive, normal human reactions that should be applied anywhere at any time?
Believe me, every care professional who goes into the care profession wishes to give these things to their clients. But the system is killing off the workers' abilities to feel and to experience empathy.
In a very practical sense, at its core, what do you do differently that you say works so much better?
Okay, so what we do differently is we have street-level centres that are open 7 days a week, like a family home. They're beautifully decorated, and there are sofas, cushions, and so on. Staff are on duty, a large number of staff, and then we deliver 3 meals a day. The doctor, the nurse, the psychiatrist, the social worker, everyone's under one roof, playing pool, engaging with children, having meals with them, and the children then access the street level centre for as long as they want and the minute they need an intervention. So if their alcoholic parent has lost it or there is no food in the house, that child knows that immediately they can make their way to the kids' company centre and the workers are there to meet their needs. Now the difference here is what happens to children who are being abused and neglected chronically is that there are changes that take place in their brain functioning. And this change is as a result of not having had sufficient care and nurture.
You're saying there's actually a physiological manifestation of neglect and abuse?
Absolutely. Physiological and structural.
How do you know that?
Well, because it's scientists have been doing this research for quite a while.
You're sponsoring some of this research, aren't you?
We're actually partnering with 35 of the world's top scientists in terms of being people who have a curiosity about what happens to children who've been neglected and abused.
What do you expect to find? What are you hoping to find?
I tell you what happens. Our ability to look at the structure and functioning of the brain has really advanced because the equipment's really advanced. So now, by just simply putting some electrodes on top of the skull or by going into a scanning machine, we can get a detailed understanding of how someone's brain is working and what's happening to them. And it's very simple, the concept. You need the front part of your brain, your prefrontal lobe, to calm yourself down and to manage things pro-socially and to have empathy. This front part of the brain literally gets programmed because of the quality of maternal love you've had. This is the extraordinary thing. This whole science is about evidencing the potency of love, which we've all instinctively known, but it's almost like science is needed to prove it to us. But the point is, your frontal lobe gets structured because of the amount of affection and attachment you've been at the receiving end of.
And you're saying that those that don't receive that get badly wired?
They have, in very chronic cases, and we saw this in Romanian orphans, because the Romanian orphans were not abused, but they were left neglected in their cots. And what people were seeing is that the children were slamming their heads, they were biting themselves, and people were wondering, why are the children doing this? And the reason the children were doing this is because when your frontal lobe is not robustly programmed, you can't calm down.
So when you see television reports about shocking murderers, John Venables, for example, recently put back into prison, branded a monster, irredeemably bad. What do you see?
Well, I see something slightly different, because the question the public have to ask themselves is, why is it that we're not finding people who are murdering or torturing other people who haven't themselves been significantly harmed as toddlers and children? Not everyone who is abused goes on to abuse, but it is true to say that 99% of people who are abusing others have been abused themselves, i.e. a fraction of people who have been chronically abused and neglected go on to chronically abuse and neglect.
Presumably that can spread. I mean, violence begets violence.
What I always say, there are two types of children in violence at street level. One type is the initiator, the child who's been chronically disturbed as a toddler, who understands violence in a visceral way and has no boundaries against it. This type of child is initially the victim in the house that they're being abused, but they always have the aspiration to make a shift from being the victim to one day having the potency of the perpetrator. And then when they reach adolescence and they're physically stronger, then what happens is they enter the public space and they like to prove to themselves that now they're top dog, that they've gone from being the underdog to being the top dog.
So these are the gang leaders, etc.
These are the gang leaders. These are the kids who really will stab people without any problem. These are the kids who are torturing other kids. These are kids who are raping other kids. So they are very potent in their violence. And because they're passively suicidal, they don't care anymore whether the police come and get them or whether you put them in prison. As far as they're concerned, a part of them died when they were being abused and neglected. There's nothing you can do to them to take that away.
What's the reoffending rate for people that you've dealt with successfully?
We have barely any of our young people end up in prison. I think a handful a year, if that. And we're dealing with 14,000 children. And I think at our street level centres, people will tell you we've got the most dangerous and challenging children. Love, if you give these children love, robust love, unrelenting love, if you tell them, you have your violence, I have my love, believe me, I'm going to win. You will win, because these kids, that is the one thing they haven't had. Love is the one thing they haven't had, and that is the one thing that surprises them.
The UK is a very wealthy country, and you're telling me about kids without basic needs, without clothing, without food. How can this be that in a modern, rich society like Britain, that these terrible inequities can occur?
Britain has provided the benefit system as a secure base so that people don't completely fall into starvation. But the benefit is given to the parent. So if your parent abuses the benefit money, then as a child you're completely powerless. If your mother or your father collects the benefit and smokes it in the morning, then you're left without food. You're left without the basic necessities.
How would you change that?
What I think we need to do is we need to embrace the reality that there are 1.5 million children living in conditions of extreme neglect and threat.
That sounds a totally immoral situation.
It is an immoral situation. It's an absolutely immoral situation. And the only reason nothing significant has happened is because the 6, the 7, the 8-year-old abused behind closed doors isn't going to be able to take the government to the Court of Human Rights.